The day I enrolled my son Ethan in Jefferson Middle School should have been a fresh start for us. After my wife's passing last year, we'd moved to this small town outside of Chicago for a chance to heal. Ethan was always a bright kid, thoughtful, creative, with eyes that sparkled when he talked about his passion for astronomy. But since age 6, he'd struggled with a stutter that worsened when he was nervous or excited. Dad, do you think they'll like me here?" he asked as we walked toward the imposing brick building. I squeezed his shoulder. "Of course they will, buddy. Just be yourself." If only I'd known how cruel children could be. The first week seemed promising. Ethan came home with stories about his science teacher who had NASA posters all over his classroom. But by the second week, something changed. He became quieter, picking at his dinner, claiming he wasn't hungry. "Everything okay at school?" I asked one evening. Fine," he mumbled, but I knew my son. Something was wrong. It was Mr. Reynolds, his English teacher, who finally called me after Ethan had been at Jefferson for 3 weeks. "Mr. Mitchell, I think you should know that Ethan's been having some trouble with another student, Connor Blackwood. He's been imitating his stutter, getting other kids to laugh. I've addressed it with him directly, but, well, I thought you should know." My blood boiled. "Has the school contacted his parents?" "His father is quite influential in town. He owns Blackwood Development. The principal has been hesitant to escalate matters. Of course, money talks, even when children suffer." The next morning, I watched from my car as Ethan walked into school, his shoulders hunched, making himself smaller. A group of kids stood near the entrance, and I saw a tall boy with sandy hair say something as he passed. The others erupted in laughter, and Ethan's pace quickened as he disappeared inside. That was enough. I didn't care if Connor's father owned half the town. I found the Blackwood Development office downtown, a sleek, modern building that stood out among the older structures. The receptionist looked surprised when I demanded to see Mr. Blackwood without an appointment. But something in my expression must have convinced her to buzz him. "James Blackwood will see you," she said. End of the hall. The office was exactly what I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the town, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than my car. Behind an imposing desk sat a man in his mid-40s, with the same sandy hair as the boy I'd seen that morning. "I'm told this is urgent," he said without looking up from his computer. "It's about your son, Connor," I replied. "He's been bullying my son." That got his attention. He finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of annoyance and dismissal. "Boys will be boys," he said. "I'm sure whatever happened has been blown out of proportion." He mocks my son's stutter. Gets other kids to join in, makes his life miserable. My voice remained calm, but my hands had balled into fists at my sides. "Look, Mr. Mitchell, David Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, children tease each other. It builds character. I'm sure your son will be fine." I felt my temper rising. "Would you like to meet him? See for yourself the damage your son is doing?" Something flickered across his face, irritation perhaps at my persistence. "Fine," he said after a moment. "Bring him by this evening if it's so important to you. Maybe we can sort this out with both children present." 6 o'clock, I agreed, turning to leave. "You know," he called after me, "sometimes these speech issues can be helped with the right therapy, if it's a matter of finances." I slammed the door behind me. That evening I explained to Ethan why we were going to the Blackwood house. He was terrified at first, but I promised him he wouldn't have to say anything he didn't want to. You'll stay with me the whole tea time?" he asked. "The whole time," I promised. The Blackwood residence was an imposing colonial-style mansion on the outskirts of town. As we pulled into the circular driveway, Ethan's breathing quickened. "It's okay, buddy. We're just going to talk." A housekeeper answered the door and led us to a living room that could have been featured in an architectural magazine. Connor sat sullenly on a couch, looking at his phone. He barely glanced up when we entered, but I saw the flash of a smirk when he spotted Ethan. James Blackwood rose from his armchair. "Mr. Mitchell, good evening, and this must be your son." "This is Ethan," I said, keeping a protective arm around his shoulders. "Hello, Ethan," Blackwood said, his voice gentler than it had been in his office. "I understand you and Connor have had some difficulties at school." Ethan looked at the floor, saying nothing. "Connor," Blackwood prompted, "do you have anything to say?" The boy shrugged. "I was just joking around. He takes everything so seriously." "Ethan," I said softly, "would you like to tell Mr. Blackwood how it makes you feel when Connor makes fun of your speech?" He hesitated, then nodded. Taking a deep breath, he looked directly at James Blackwood. "It makes me feel like I'm not worth anything, like I don't deserve to speak at all. Every morning I wake up and my stomach hurts because I don't want to go to school." As he spoke, something extraordinary happened. James Blackwood's expression changed. The color drained from his face, and he stared at Ethan as if he'd seen a ghost. "I've heard that voice before," he whispered almost to himself. "What?" I asked, confused by his reaction. Blackwood sat down heavily, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Connor, go to your room," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But Dad, now Connor." When the boy had left, Blackwood turned to me. "Mr. Mitchell, forgive me for asking, but your son's stutter, is it hereditary?" The question caught me off guard. "Yes. My brother had the same speech pattern when we were growing up." "Your brother," Blackwood repeated slowly. "Would his name be Jason Mitchell?" I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. "Yes. How did you know that?" His eyes closed briefly, as if confirming something painful. "Because 25 years ago, a young man with that same stutter saved my life." I stared at James Blackwood, trying to process his words. "You knew my brother?" He gestured for us to sit. "Before I built all this, I was nobody. Worse than nobody, I was homeless, living on the streets of Chicago after aging out of the foster system." Ethan sat beside me, his eyes wide with curiosity. "I was 19, Blackwood continued, sleeping in an alley behind a university building. It was January, one of the coldest winters on record. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. He paused, collecting himself. A young man was walking home from his night shift at the university library. He saw me huddled there and stopped. Most people looked through me, but not him. He had a thermos of hot soup and a sandwich wrapped in foil. He gave them to me without hesitation. I felt a chill run down my spine. "He had a stutter," Blackwood said, looking at Ethan. "Just like yours. He told me his name was J.J. Jason, said he'd bring more food tomorrow." "That sounds like Uncle Jason," Ethan whispered, without a trace of his stutter. "He kept his promise," Blackwood continued. "Every night for 2 weeks, he brought food, sometimes clothes. One night the temperature dropped to 20 below. He found me nearly unconscious from hypothermia." His voice grew thick with emotion. "Instead of calling an ambulance, which I couldn't afford, he helped me to his tiny apartment, let me sleep on his couch. I was nobody to him, just a homeless kid. But he said everyone deserves kindness." I could hear Jason's voice in those words. It was exactly something he would say. "He let me stay until I got on my feet, helped me apply for scholarships. I got into a community college program, found a job. We lost touch after he transferred to another university." Blackwood stood and walked to a small desk in the corner of the room. From a drawer, he removed an old, worn photo and handed it to me. There was Jason, 20 years younger, his familiar half-smile on his face. Beside him stood a younger James Blackwood, thin but clean, wearing a collared shirt that looked too big for him. "The day I got my first real job," he explained. He was so proud. I passed the photo to Ethan, who studied it closely. I tried to find him years later to thank him properly, but by then he'd moved. I never knew what happened to him. He looked at me. Until today. Ethan looked up at him. My uncle Saint Stutter was worse when he was younger, Dad always told me. Blackwood nodded. It was. But he never let it stop him from helping others, from speaking up when it mattered. He knelt in front of Ethan, meeting him at eye level. I'm so sorry for what Connor has done. Your uncle changed my life with his kindness. I wouldn't have any of this, he gestured to the house around us, without him. He stood and faced me. Mr. Mitchell, where is Jason now? I'd like to thank him personally. I swallowed hard. Jason passed away 3 years ago. Car accident. Blackwood's face fell. I'm so sorry. I waited too long to try to find him again. He would have been proud to know the impact he had, I said quietly. The next day, I received a call from the school principal. Connor had been given 2 weeks detention and would be required to attend anti-bullying counseling. More surprisingly, James Blackwood had made a substantial donation to establish a new speech therapy program at the school, with additional funding for anti-bullying initiatives. When Ethan came home that afternoon, something was different. His shoulders weren't hunched, and there was a small smile on his face. Connor apologized to me in front of the whole C class, he said, and his dad came to talk to everyone about bullying. A week later, we received an invitation to dinner at the Blackwood house. I was hesitant, but Ethan wanted to go. To my surprise, Connor was different, subdued, even respectful. After dinner, while the kids were in Connor's room looking at his telescope, Ethan's eyes had lit up when he learned Connor shared his interest in astronomy. James handed me an envelope. I've established a college fund for Ethan, he said, raising his hand when I began to protest. It's what Jason would have wanted, and there's something else. He led me to his home office and showed me a plaque on the wall. It read, Blackwood Foundation for Youth Support, established in honor of Jason Mitchell, who taught me that kindness speaks louder than words. The foundation helps homeless youth get education, housing, job training, Blackwood explained. It's been operating quietly for 5 years, but I never knew who to name it after. Now I do. I felt tears well up in my eyes. Jason never told me about helping you. He never bragged about his good deeds. That's what made him special, Blackwood said. He saw value in me when no one else did, not even myself. The following month, Blackwood Development broke ground on a new youth center in town. At the ceremony, Ethan was asked to speak. Standing at the podium, my son looked out at the crowd. For a moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Then he took a deep breath. My Uncle Jason always said that words can be hard, but kindness is easy, he began. As he continued speaking, his stutter was still there. But something had changed. He wasn't ashamed anymore. Each word came with confidence, even through the stutters. In the front row, James Blackwood listened with tears in his eyes, nodding encouragement. Beside him, Connor watched with newfound respect. My son was finding his voice, and somewhere I knew Jason was smiling. The youth center became a symbol of change in our small town. Construction moved quickly, and within 6 months, the Jason Mitchell Youth Center was ready for its grand opening. The modern building stood on what had once been an abandoned lot, now transformed into a beacon of hope with its glass front and welcoming entrance. During those months, Ethan's life at school transformed too. The bullying stopped completely, and though his stutter remained, his confidence grew daily. Connor, surprisingly, had become something of a protector. Any time another kid made fun of Ethan's speech, Connor shut it down immediately. They're not really friends, I told my sister Kate during one of our weekly calls, but they've found a strange kind of respect for each other. Jason would be proud, she said, of both of you. The night before the center's opening, Blackwood called me with an unexpected request. I'd like Ethan to cut the ribbon tomorrow, he said, and say a few words. I hesitated. That's a lot of pressure, James. There'll be cameras, the town council. I know. But his story, Jason's story, is what this center is about. Overcoming obstacles, finding your voice. It would mean a lot. I promised to ask Ethan, expecting him to refuse. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. I would want to do it, Dad, he said, with determination in his eyes. For Uncle Jason. The next day, a crowd gathered outside the new building. The mayor made a speech about community investment, and James spoke briefly about the foundation's mission. Then he introduced Ethan. My son walked to the podium looking small beside the town officials in their suits. He adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces. I could see his hands trembling. My name is Ethan M. Mitchell, he began. My Uncle Jason had a stutter just like mine. He paused, took a deep breath. People used to make fun of him, just like they made fun of me. But he never let it stop him from helping others. The crowd was silent, hanging on each word despite, or perhaps because of, the effort it took Ethan to speak them. Uncle Jason saved Mr. Blackwood's life by being kind when no one else was. He didn't need perfect speech to change someone's wee world. Ethan's voice grew stronger. This KISS center will help kids who need someone to believe in them. That's what Uncle Jason did. That's what Mr. Blackwood is doing now. That's what we all can do. He looked directly at Connor in the front row. Even people who make mistakes can learn to be kind. I've seen that myself. With that, Ethan stepped to the large red ribbon stretched across the entrance and cut it with the ceremonial scissors. The crowd erupted in applause. A reporter from the local paper approached us afterward. That was quite a speech, young man, she said to Ethan. May I ask you a few questions for the article? As Ethan spoke with the reporter, James came to stand beside me. You should be proud, he said. Not many adults would have had the courage to do what Ethan just did. I am proud, I replied. But I'm also worried. All this attention... Life in a small town, James said with a shrug. The story will be news for a week, then something else will come along. I nodded, watching Ethan gesturing animatedly to the reporter, his stutter still present but no longer holding him back. I couldn't have been more wrong about the attention fading. The local article was picked up by a Chicago newspaper, then a national education blog. Within 2 weeks, a producer from a morning talk show called wanting to feature Ethan and the story behind the youth center. It's your decision, buddy, I told Ethan. No pressure either way. I want to do it, he said. If he helps other kids with stutters. The morning of the interview, we were both nervous wrecks. The show had sent a car to bring us to their Chicago studio, and Ethan stared out the window the entire ride, unusually quiet. You know, I said, trying to distract him, your Uncle Jason would never have done this. He hated being the center of attention. Ethan smiled slightly. Maybe I got something from my mom's side then. The mention of Claire, my late wife, brought a bittersweet feeling. She'd been outgoing, fearless. Ethan had her eyes. Definitely, I agreed. She would have loved this. The studio was a whirlwind of activity. People with headsets, bright lights, makeup artists who fussed over both of us. The host, a woman named Valerie Richards, came to meet us before the segment. I'm so pleased you're here, she said, shaking Ethan's hand. My brother had a stutter when we were kids. Your story really touched me. When the camera started rolling, Valerie introduced the segment with a brief overview of the youth center and the story behind it. Then she turned to Ethan. So, Ethan, tell us about your Uncle Jason and how his story led to this amazing new center in your town. I held my breath, but Ethan spoke clearly, his stutter present but not overwhelming. My Uncle Jason helped a homeless teenager one winter, he said. He never told anyone about it. He just did it because it was right. That teenager grew up to be Mr. B. Blackwood, who built the center in my uncle's memory. And I understand you had your own challenges at school, Valerie prompted gently. Ethan nodded. I was bullied because of my stutter. By Mr. Blackwood's son, actually. A murmur went through the studio audience. That must have been difficult, Valerie said. It was. But when Mr. Blackwood found out who I was, everything changed. Now his son and I are, well, not really for friends, but okay. Valerie smiled. Sometimes that's progress enough. What would you say to other kids who might be going through something similar? Ethan thought for a moment. I'd say that your V voice matters, even if it's different. And sometimes, the people who are mean to you just need to learn better. The segment ended with a video of the youth center opening, showing Ethan cutting the ribbon. When the cameras stopped, Valerie leaned over. That was perfect, Ethan. Absolutely perfect. As we were leaving the studio, my phone buzzed with a text from James. You might want to check social media. Dux Ethan Speaks is trending. By the time we returned home that evening, clips from Ethan's interview had gone viral. His words about voices mattering even if they're different had resonated far beyond what any of us expected. The next morning, I was making breakfast when Ethan came downstairs clutching his tablet. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking. "You need to see this." He handed me the tablet, open to an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Your nephew saved me too." I took the tablet from Ethan's hands, my heart pounding as I read the message. "Dear Ethan and Mr. Mitchell, I saw your interview yesterday and couldn't believe my eyes. Jason Mitchell was my TA in a freshman writing seminar at Northwestern in 2002. I was failing the class because I was too embarrassed to participate. I had a severe stutter and had been ridiculed all through high school. Jason stayed after class one day and told me about his own speech challenges. He worked with me all semester, never once making me feel less than capable. Because of him, I not only passed the class, but went on to become a speech pathologist. I now work with children who stutter. I never got to thank him properly. When I tried to find him years later, I couldn't track him down. I would love to speak with you both if you're willing. Sincerely, Dr. Marcus Fernandez." I looked up at Ethan, whose eyes were wide. "There's more," he said, scrolling down. 3 more emails like that. By the end of the week, we'd received over 30 messages from people whose lives Jason had touched. A woman whose car he'd helped fix when she was stranded with her children. A former classmate who'd been contemplating suicide until Jason noticed and spent hours talking him through his darkest moment. A neighbor boy with a learning disability whom Jason had tutored patiently every weekend for a year. "I had no idea," I told James when he came over to see the messages. "Jason never mentioned any of this." "Some people don't need recognition for their good deeds," James replied. "They just do them because that's who they are." We decided to organize a memorial event at the youth center, inviting everyone who had reached out. What we didn't expect was how many would actually come. The day of the memorial, the center's main hall was packed. Dr. Fernandez had flown in from California. The former suicidal classmate, now a father of 3, drove from Michigan. The stranded mother brought her now teenage children from Iowa. Nearly 50 people gathered to share stories about a man whose quiet acts of kindness had rippled outward in ways he never knew. Ethan sat in the front row, listening intently to each speaker. When the formal sharing ended, he tugged on my sleeve. "Dad, I want to say something." I nodded, and he walked to the front of the room. The crowd quieted. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "My uncle never told us these stories, but hearing them makes me realize something important." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "We all have the power to change things, not with big actions, but with small ones. Uncle Jason didn't build buildings or donate millions. He just noticed when people needed help, And he helped them. Ethan's voice grew stronger, his stutter less pronounced as he continued. I want to be like him. Not because he was perfect, but because he was brave enough to speak when it was hard and kind enough to help when it was needed. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. As people began to mingle afterward, Dr. Fernandez approached us. I've been working on a research study about successful adults who stutter, he told me. Would you and Ethan be interested in participating? It's aimed at helping young people see that a stutter doesn't have to limit their future. Before I could respond, Ethan nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely, I said. That sounds like something Jason would have wanted to be part of. Over the next few months, Ethan worked with Dr. Fernandez's research team. Though his stutter didn't disappear, he learned techniques to manage it and, more importantly, to value his voice despite its differences. The research eventually led to a new program at the youth center specifically designed for kids with speech challenges. One afternoon, almost a year after our first confrontation in his office, James invited Ethan and me to Blackwood Development's headquarters. I have something to show you, he said, leading us to a large conference room. On the wall hung a portrait of Jason, painted from the old photograph. Below it was a plaque that read, "The Jason Mitchell Scholarship Fund for students who demonstrate exceptional character through acts of kindness. The company will fund 10 full college scholarships each year," James explained, "for kids who might not have the highest grades or the most impressive extracurriculars, but who show the kind of character your brother had." I was speechless. But Ethan stepped forward. "Thank you," he said, without a single stutter. In that moment of deep emotion, his words flowed freely. Connor entered the room carrying a folder. He'd grown taller over the year, his features maturing. The smirk that once seemed permanently affixed to his face had been replaced by a more thoughtful expression. "Hey, Ethan," he said, "Dad told me to give you this." Ethan opened the folder to find an application for a summer astronomy camp at the state university. "I'm going too," Connor added. "Thought it might be cool if we both went." On the drive home, Ethan was quiet, staring out the window. "Everything okay, buddy?" I asked. "I was just thinking about Uncle Jason," he said. "Do you think he knows? About all the people he helped? About the center and the scholarships?" I considered the question carefully. I don't know if he knows in the way we understand knowing, but I like to think that somewhere, somehow, he sees the ripples he created. Ethan nodded, satisfied with the answer. That summer, Ethan attended the astronomy camp with Connor. The once bitter bully and the boy he had tormented weren't exactly best friends, but they had found common ground in their shared interest in the stars. Sometimes at night, I'd receive photos from Ethan of distant galaxies they'd observed through the university's telescope. On the anniversary of the youth center's opening, the town held a celebration. As mayor and other officials gave their speeches, I noticed Ethan sitting with a group of younger kids from the speech program, helping them practice their presentations. James came to sit beside me. "Look at that," he said, nodding toward Ethan. "The cycle continues." "What do you mean?" "Jason helped me when I was lost. Now his memory helps others through the center. Ethan is already passing it on to those kids. That's how real change happens, one person to another, rippling outward." As I watched my son patiently encouraging a young girl as she practiced speaking, I felt a profound sense of peace. Jason's legacy wasn't in buildings or programs, though those were meaningful. It was in this quiet moment of kindness, in my son finding his voice and using it to help others find theirs. "You know," James said thoughtfully, "when I first heard Ethan stutter that night at my house, I felt like I was being given a second chance, a chance to repay a debt I never could. But I've realized something important." "What's that?" I asked. "Kindness isn't about repaying debts, it's about passing them forward. That's what Jason understood all along. As the celebration continued around us, I knew he was right. My brother's simple acts of kindness had created waves that continued to spread, touching lives he never knew, creating changes he could never have imagined. And in my son, with his determined voice that refused to be silenced, that legacy would continue, one word, one kindness, one life at a time.